Hi, this is Arnav. Welcome to the channel. Today I have Matt with me. Matt leads the community for Civil, which is building a decentralized marketplace for sustainable journalism. And today we are going to talk to him more about his project. So, hi, Matt, how are you?
Hey, Arnav, thanks for having me today.
Awesome, awesome. So, can you give a brief background and how did you actually get involved with Civil?
Sure. Well, thanks for the introduction. As you said, Civil is the decentralized marketplace for sustainable journalism. We are building a publishing platform that sits on top of Ethereum for independent newsrooms that journalists can launch and retain their own editorial and business autonomy. So I've been involved with Civil full-time for about 6 or 7 months now, and previously had been talking to the initial founder, Matthew Isles, and his co-founder, Lillian Ruiz, of the project for some time before that, and have known Matthew for years and have known he's had a passion for journalism and thinking about the broken funding models that have led to the current dire state that I'm sure we can get more into later. My background is also more on the media and journalism side. I've been really interested in blockchain for probably closer to 2 years now, but certainly journalism for much longer. And what we are trying to do at Civil, really above all, is to promote a new funding model for journalism that can help it better adapt to certain realities with the information age and our increasingly digitally native services that we consume in other industries. So blockchain really emerged as a compelling solution for a potential journalism funding model when we recognized the decentralized nature and what that promised in terms of having a protocol that could be governed by a large community versus a highly concentrated, centralized body, normally a publisher or conglomerate that owns several publishers. I mean, here in the United States, we have, I think it's 5 organizations control something like 90% of mainstream media outlets. So it's not surprising that we are quite literally at a time when public trust in media is at historic lows. Much of what we want to do is really try to return the power and influence over journalism back to the public. And we recognize that journalism is a public good more than anything else. And we want to create a scenario in which journalists can focus on serving their readers above all else and not worry about satiating the demands of third-party publishers or advertisers or others that could otherwise get in the way of the transactional relationship between journalist and reader.
So, Matt, you have started talking about the problems that are existing in the journalism industry. So, can we get a bit deeper into what is the current state of the journalism industry and the problem it faces?
It's grim. There are a lot of problems, and certainly there are a lot of people that are much smarter on this topic than I have that have waxed on this many times. So I'll try to give a high-level overview here. I think first and foremost, you just need to look at the number of journalists who are employed either full-time or even part-time today, and the fact that it is drastically lower than it has been previously. Here in the US, for example, there are something like 40% fewer journalists working in newsrooms than there were 10 years ago, and that's a phenomenon that has really played out around the world. Part of this is just due to the mass consolidation that has occurred in ownership structures for many of these publishing organizations. We have something like 5 giant conglomerates, again, here in the US that own something like 90% of mainstream media outlets. And again, that's a phenomenon that has played out similarly worldwide. The incentive model right now that that journalism is operating on is just broken. You have a duopoly with Facebook and Google controlling the vast majority of digital advertising revenue on the market. And there is not nearly an equal distribution right now of the capital that is coming into those companies and going out to equitably to support journalists that are doing this quality work. So I mentioned before the perverted incentive structures that now exist as a result. You have newsrooms that have to, for the sake of survival, prioritize writing an article that you're confident is going to generate 30,000 clicks to satiate the demands of advertiser X. So what that might mean is we're going to get a whole lot more articles with GIFs and Kardashians and less truly revolutionary journalism, things that are going to really realize change and expose important issues, because you can't afford to send a journalist to a school board meeting or a seemingly under the radar government committee hearing. the town that I grew up in, and part of the reason that this cause is really near and dear to my heart is really ground zero of where the Boston Globe's Spotlight team broke the Catholic priest abuse scandal that became this worldwide phenomenon and really underscored the impact of investigative journalism. Knowing that investigative journalism teams around the world, the types of teams that are going to uncover these stories, are struggling to realize adequate levels of funding to support their work. Sometimes the stories might take 6 months of behind the scenes reporting before you can publish a single word. Knowing that those incentive structures have twisted so much in the digital economy that this is becoming less and less possible is frankly why we are so passionate about doing what we're doing at Civil. And we believe that in building a platform economy, what Civil is building ultimately is a publishing platform on which journalists can come and found independent newsrooms. We want to be a marketplace that is connecting buyers and sellers, who in this case just happen to be journalists and readers who want to come and support quality journalism. We see a unique opportunity to do so in a cooperatively owned and operated marketplace, and that's what blockchain really unlocks and enables here. So if you look at some of the largest companies to have been founded in the past 20 plus years, from Amazon to eBay to Uber to Airbnb, the vast majority have applied the same platform model. We see no reason that we shouldn't be able to do the same for journalism. And when you factor blockchain and cryptoeconomics into the equation here, we see a very attractive incentive structure in which you can come in and you can own a piece of this network. So you're incentivized in its positive growth and governance. And we can get a little bit more into that governance aspect in a minute and how we're applying token curated registry models. But we think that this is at minimum, novel solution that could help promote a better, more sustainable funding model for journalism going forward. We're not ever going to pretend that we are a silver bullet solution that has figured out every possible solution, but we think this is a novel path forward. And to date, we've found about 100 independent journalists that have agreed and have come and formed what are right now 13 independent newsrooms on Civil. And these are what we're calling our first fleet newsrooms that we have provided sustainability grants to begin their operations ahead of our general launch this summer, when our Civil registry will launch and when anybody can apply to launch a newsroom on the Civil marketplace.
So Matt, can you talk about I'm just curious, just to give a bit of the background of the journalism industry to the audience, like how the industry has changed with internet, like before internet, how was the industry and how it has become now? Just a bit of an overview that I think would be really helpful.
Sure. So really for centuries, you could go back as far as Gutenberg and the printing press in the 17th century or 16th century, I should say. Journalism has largely subsisted on an ad-driven revenue model where you're a publisher, you own a newspaper, and you have advertisers and other third parties that are coming in and supporting your operations, and knowing that you have a circulation of 100,000 people or whatever that number might be. It was a pretty tried and true model. It worked. The incentives for both sides were clear, and that gave rise to the global journalism industry. Right around the early 2000s, when more and more publications were investing in digital operations and really going full force and recognizing that increasingly that's where audiences were moving and that there were opportunities for more and newer engagements, it was this very exciting time for the industry, and anything seemed possible. What has happened in the ensuing 2 decades has been a shift to interactions and engagements and metrics that don't necessarily beget quality for advertising. So for a long time, impressions were the be all end all. How many people saw this article? That might have shifted then to, unique views or click-throughs or different types of engagements. Advertisers have been tweaking this model more and more because certainly their incentive is to get their product in front of as many people as possible. And with these added levels of transparency and frankly, just the 24/7 attention economy that has come up around it and the increased competition, I'll use it lightly because I think one of the issues that we can get more into after this is the difference between journalism and content. But all of this equation has really added up to produce a very difficult situation for journalists and publishers that are focused on producing quality journalism, which requires a lot of legwork. It requires capital to fund it. And when you're competing with other sources that might not be credible journalism, to say nothing of those that are even maliciously attempting to come in and present misinformation as fact. It is prohibitively difficult to sustain yourself on ad revenue, which is why we've seen such a precipitous decline in the number of gainfully employed journalists, both in print and digital mediums. And we think that that is ultimately about the incentive structures. Now, I'm not trying to vilify advertisers here. I mean, many of the journalists that have come onto our platform and want to write on Civil, the first thing they say is, listen, advertisers are not the bad guys here. This is more about the incentive systems, and certainly programmatic advertising might be a different story. But we think that there is absolutely such a thing as ethical advertising, but like the issue plaguing journalism itself, we need to really rethink the incentive structure and what an always-on digital economy means relative to this model that really worked without interruption for several hundred years.
And like now we have various people starting their own blogs and writing a lot of things, and it has now made so many new writers, and the competition has also increased. So how do you see that, like how this has affected the journalism industry? Like anyone can start writing, and they might not be that credible, but they might get the clicks and the views.
I think the fact that the internet has made journalism so much more inclusive is on the surface a great thing, but it definitely does not come without certain inherent risks or problems. And at the top of that list is what you just cited. What is the difference between journalism and content? So for as much as we're doing at Civil in terms of building a blockchain-based publishing platform and the novel and new tactics we need to employ, one thing that we often say is reinventing journalistic ethics that have generally worked for several hundred years are not one of the things that we need to try to redo, nor are we the people, certainly at Civil, to do so. What we are trying to do is build a technology platform that really prioritizes promoting quality and ethical journalism and punishes or disincentivizes those that do not adhere to those same standards. So our vision for Civil ultimately is that we want to be the most trusted marketplace for quality, trustworthy, fact-based news, and to know that not only are the participants in this network doing so because they're ideologically incentivized to do so, because journalism matters, because you need to support it, but because there is a cryptoeconomic incentive structure in here in which, I, somebody who is owning Civil tokens, who is a participant in this network, am incentivized to see this network grow, to see additional quality newsrooms come on, to see more quality readers and supporters follow these newsrooms and join, because this is going to contribute to the positive growth and evolution of this network in which I am an owner, in which I have a very real ownership stake. And with certain technical aspects that we're working into the platform, it's going to be much easier to quickly not only see who is in violation of these ethical standards and who is not, but to very quickly unplug access for those that are found to be by the community in violation. Now, I haven't gotten too deep, and this might be good to kind of break, but into the ethical standards, but that really is the foundation of our platform, a document known as the Civil Constitution.
Yeah. I think now let's talk about the architecture of the Civil platform. So, like, how does it? I think you have a core product. When I was reading your white paper, I was going through your website. You had this core product. You have civil token economy, civil registry, and civil constitution. So let's talk about first your core product, and let's go down how the constitution and all the governance takes place.
Sure. So yeah, let me start with the Constitution, because I think anytime we're talking about what we're doing from a technical perspective, that really is the foundational document for everything. So we are building the Civil Protocol, and that is at the very core of our technology and what we're doing. And the Civil Protocol is ultimately going to be governed by the larger community of Civil token holders. It is responsible for serving these ethical journalistic standards that are outlined in the Civil Constitution. So this was an initial effort of, I would say, more than 50 people, including the core Civil team, a number of our closest advisors from the media space, from the legal space, and from the cryptoeconomic space. And what the Civil Constitution represents and how it will be served by the Civil Protocol is to develop a spectrum of what does and does not constitute ethical journalism on Civil. So first and foremost, any information that is presented as news must be fact-based, must be verifiable, must be very clearly tagged as such, just as any information that is presented as opinion must be very clearly marked that it is opinion, and certainly any facts or arguments cited therein must come from vetted, reliable sources. So we have a spectrum that we think should absolutely transcend any specific political ideology or belief structure. Really, the only dogma that is a guiding force on Civil that you must subscribe to if you want to join this network is that news should be fact-based. And we think that this is a novel new incentive structure in which you have a proof of stake system where any newsroom that wants to go onto the network and publish must stake a real value in the form of Civil tokens. And any party that might want to challenge either a prospective newsroom because they are not meeting the ethical guidelines, there are things in their past that might say that they are prone to promote hate speech or incite crowds to violence, or they've been multiply and credibly in the past accused of plagiarism. If any of these things come up, then I, as a self-interested member of this network who has these Civil tokens, will say, I don't think your newsroom is going to be a valuable addition to this network. And I, therefore, am willing to risk a real economic value in the form of my own tokens and stake them against yours. And then the community can vote as to whether or not we are following the rules of the road that are outlined in this Civil constitution. So really the Civil protocol is going to be how this entire phenomenon is enforced, and how we think that we can not only establish an initial high quality marketplace for journalism, but ensure that it can really scale and that the incentive structure is right, that no single party can come in and manipulate the community to befit their interests at the expense of the rules of this economic game known as the Civil Constitution.
So like you'll have a website in which we'll have this newsrooms, and people can become anyone can become a newsroom. They can submit they have to submit some stake in Civil tokens, and the community decides whether to let them in or to not let them in as the new newsroom, and they then start publishing content, and that is how it works out. Can you explain that? How from a user perspective, how would Civil look like?
Sure. So there are really two different answers to that question. I will tackle what you said first, but with the important caveat that many people who come to Civil are going to be coming to the many independent newsrooms that are living on our platform that have their own unique URLs. And you might just see in the top right corner of this website that this newsroom runs on Civil. And for many individuals, that will be their first initial and the majority of their exposure for some time to Civil. In some ways, you can think of it like Wikipedia. I'm going to Wikipedia because I want to know what the capital of Kyrgyzstan is. And I know that even though I am not a Wikipedia editor, there is this self-interested community of editors that are incentivized to promote good governance that exists just underneath the surface here. And that's just fine. I mean, one of the things that is going to make this network really, we think, thrive and grow quickly is that knowledge of nor passion for blockchain or cryptocurrency, neither of those things is going to be a barrier to entry. I can come and I can transact with my credit card via Stripe, which we're integrating, and read and support journalism. And I think that's a really important baseline to set, that we do not want to limit this marketplace solely to cryptocurrency enthusiasts from day one. We want to be as inclusive as possible to as many populations as possible from the get-go. Now, that said, anybody can apply to launch a newsroom because, again, we want to be very inclusive. We don't want to send a signal to the marketplace that only if you're an established journalist with a long and illustrious track record at well-known publications are you eligible. That is absolutely not the case. Those people are certainly welcome. But part of the issue with journalism and the mass consolidation that has really befallen the industry in recent years is that you have very concentrated hubs now. If I don't live in London or New Delhi or New York or San Francisco, then odds are I might not be as close to media circles that I would want to be in otherwise. We want Civil to be a destination where anybody from any parts of the world can come and launch newsrooms and really give a voice to many areas in which incredibly important stories are going unreported. So to apply to launch a newsroom on Civil, you will need to do 4 things. You need to submit a mission, which is really a mission statement, I should say, which is what is your newsroom, what will it cover, and what makes it novel. I want to launch a newsroom that's focused on reporting on crime in Brooklyn because I don't think that the New York Times, the New York Daily News, or other local papers are doing an adequate job. And I think that I'm uniquely suited to do so because I have written as a freelance journalist for X number of years. I live in Brooklyn. I'm based here. So that's the basic sort of mission that you want to send. Who are you? Why is your newsroom a relevant addition to this marketplace? Number two is you need to submit a charter. So who else is involved with you in this project? And this is really where you are signaling to the network of civil token holders who are incentivized to make sure that this marketplace grows in a really high quality manner. You will say, okay, here's my background and here are my other cohorts. So ideally they should look at you and say, these people look like great credible participants. This is also the point at which you might want to look into somebody's background. And maybe you're digging into a couple of years worth of activity on Twitter or Facebook. And you find, in a really extreme scenario that we hope doesn't happen, but that we need to account for, you find that, one of the roster participants has been making a lot of slanderous statements about somebody or some group, or perhaps even, making statements that could be very easily construed as hate speech. If I find that, and I am one of these incentivized participants in this network, I may well decide that I want to challenge this newsroom and say, because I've found X, Y, or Z, I do not think, and that are outlined, in the civil constitution, I do not think that these would make for quality additions to the civil marketplace. So submit a roster, submit a charter. Those are pretty standard steps. 3 is you must virtually sign the civil constitution and pledge to adhere to its ethical journalism standards to the best of yours and your newsroom's ability at all times while publishing on the platform. So this is in essence where you are locking yourself into a smart contract and saying, I will follow these rules. And that is the basis of a challenge. And then the fourth and final step, so you've got submit a mission, submit a roster, sign the civil constitution. The fourth step is to stake civil tokens. And that's where you are stating the seriousness of your intent. You are entering into this token economy and you're saying, I want my newsroom to exist and I will stake this fixed supply that is specified in the civil constitution as a deposit, as a signal to this marketplace of how serious I am about this endeavor and why I think that this is going to be a great sustainable pursuit. If I follow those 4 steps and I have a good background, and the idea is that most applicants should follow this model, the community will take no action. And after a finite waiting period, I will be added to the civil registry. The civil registry is our version of a token curated registry. It is the whitelist on which all newsrooms must be listed to unlock publishing rights on civil.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I think I personally have become now very interested to know how the crypto economic incentives works, because that is what is I think the basis of civil, that you want to create an incentive structure in which we have good journalism and bad journalism is incentivized out of the system. So how does that work? Like just to put in some numbers, like how much is the incentive, how much tokens civil token one needs to put out, and how much, how does the whole structure work? Like, say if someone is coming to the submitting their request to become a newsroom, then what would happen? Like, it goes to the smart contract and then people can see that, and how is the governance there? How does that work out?
Yeah. So you asked about the amount first. That's something that we haven't specified, but we will be doing soon. It will be pegged probably to USD, just so if there is ever any kind of fluctuation, it's not going to be suddenly twice the cost of what it was before.
Or you can use DAI, a stable coin like DAI as well.
Yeah, I mean, our intent is to do it via civil and fix it, again, to the point of inclusivity and recognizing that a lot of these newsroom applicants might be first-time participants in cryptoeconomic systems. We want to keep it as simple as possible. Certainly, we would never rule out other options in the long term, but that's our initial goal. And to fix it to a very familiar currency amount, let's say, for them. Now, the goal with this number is to come up with something that is not so prohibitively high that it's going to rule out all but really wealthy individuals or established publishing organizations. But we want it to be high enough that it will seriously disincentivize your standard run-of-the-mill trolls, spammers, to say nothing of the more malicious actors that are actively seeding either non-information or misinformation on, I'll say, Facebook and Twitter in particular, because they're by far the numbers 1 and 2 largest media-serving platforms today. We want to introduce an incentive structure that is going to, as we like to say, make it prohibitively difficult to be a jerk on civil. Now, anybody can apply, and if you are a troll or a spammer and you want to try to game the system, good luck. on the other side of things, you have an incentivized community that is waiting to recognize your application, challenge it, and then win an economic reward. So the way that this staking game works is if a newsroom is challenged, and this can happen with either a prospective newsroom or a newsroom that is already on the civil registry and that is found to be violating a serious ethical term in the civil constitution, I would mount my own challenge stake. The community would vote, and if it's found that my challenge of your newsroom was with merit, was warranted, you would lose your initial newsroom deposit that you either put forth in this challenge process or that you had put forth long before in the challenge process, and that stays live as a deposit stake when you're on the registry. I would win a significant sum, approximately half of your deposit, as sort of a finder's fee for playing this game known as spot the unethical newsroom and keep it off the civil registry. I would receive that as a reward for playing the game well, and then everybody else who voted with me would receive a proportionate distribution of the remainder of your stake. So that's the economic incentive system as it relates to the civil registry and good governance.
Mm-hmm. And what happens to people, like, say, who vote against, like who voted in favor of the parties now getting kicked out? Is there an incentive to vote as well, that you need to stake some tokens?
Yes. So you would go in and vote with tokens. There's no penalty for voting for the losing side. You would get those tokens back. You're not losing those. But the way that you want to recognize this game as a participant in the civil token economy is that the civil constitution is really, in many ways, a dressed up terms of service. This is the rules of the game. This is what newsrooms must do to publish on civil. So when I see that there's a challenge occurring in the community, I'd mentioned before, we hope that just ideologically, you want to support quality journalism and stand for what you think represents that and push back against what doesn't. But beyond that, there's this economic incentive of, okay, there's a term in the civil constitution that says hate speech of any kind is not tolerable on the civil platform. If you see a newsroom challenged against somebody who, has been repeatedly using racial slurs on Twitter, as a civil token holder that this vote is as close to a slam dunk as you'll see on the platform. So you might be more incentivized to jump on board and vote for this and vote overwhelmingly against something that is very clearly violating these ethical guidelines.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And can you walk us through, like, how does one strike, like how does it work? Like, say if I'm putting a lot of like racial content, and I'm doing hate speech, I'm putting hate speech on my newsroom. So like, how does one actually say, like, how does the proofing system work? Like, say, how do I send you the link on the civil platform? I'll send the links of the tweets or the posts, and the community can see that. How does that work?
So we will be ahead of our general launch, or governance launch, as we call it, when the civil registry will be live. There will be reporting templates included, so that there is a standard process by which communities can mount challenges and point out what issues are. We certainly envision that there will be room for external links, because I think a big part of this, especially when you're looking at a prospective newsroom, is what in this individual's background might constitute such a violation, and where is your proof? And then this is where the community comes in and votes and says, is this strong enough proof, or are you really grasping at straws? Or are you trying to mount a frivolous challenge to game the system?
Okay. And like, this is like the civil platform. You have the civil company, and you have like civil media labs. So how is that? And I read on your white paper you have like a for-profit media venture as well. So how are these divided?
So yeah, we are envisioning a vast civil ecosystem. I work for, and I'm a co-founder at the Civil Media Company. So we are responsible for developing this initial civil protocol and releasing it to the community, at which point it will become decentralized, at which point we will divest ourselves of the ability to own the protocol's governance. It's going to be driven by the community. In the long term, the Civil Media Company's role will be to be a shepherd for the civil protocol, to continue to contribute heavily to its growth and evolution. And then increasingly, we are also going to be very focused on the sustainability of newsrooms in this civil marketplace. So partnering with a lot of nonprofit and for-profit journalism organizations, content management system organizations, CRMs, payments organizations, and ensuring that we can support these newsrooms and make sure that they are set up for success as much as possible, while certainly always retaining autonomy. Now, as it relates to making money, I'll start by saying what we will never do as the civil media company, and that is to take a transactional fee from any payments that go from readers to newsrooms. We started this conversation by talking about the perverse incentive structures that have led to journalism's current state. And we are very, very hyper conscious of that always, and never want to be the proverbial middleman or middlewoman that is getting between reader and journalist. So we will never take a cut ourselves of those transactions. What we will do and how we are going to employ this ecosystem as a profitable venture, we think, is several fold. We are going to pursue both direct and indirect monetization strategies. We recently set up an organization called Civil Studios, which is going to be an independent organization in which we retain a stake. And this is basically going to be our version of Netflix originals, and employing that strategy where it's a venture builder model where we are going to look to engage and support especially promising newsroom initiatives or journalism projects that can happen on either the civil platform or frankly just blockchain media projects in general. We often say that our real success metric here is if a blockchain-based media project ever wins an Emmy, it will come from Civil Studios. So that's going to be one of our more indirect strategies. And then we are also setting up Civil Labs, which we're going to be sharing a lot more about publicly in the near future. That is going to be the bedrock of our app store economy model, if you will. So one of the things that we haven't talked about a lot here, but that is very central to our strategy, is to bring and incentivize many, many developers onto our platform. So everything about the Civil protocol is going to be open source. We want people to come in and build on us, and we see a great potential for many, many apps and services, especially as they relate to engagement, which we think is an area that is ripe for disruption. So we actually recently established a partnership with Neva Labs, which comes from the founders of Storyful, and they are longtime journalists turned entrepreneurs who are very focused on social discourse, longtime executives at both Facebook and Twitter, who think that as it relates to journalism, there is a new model that can be pioneered for engagement. So they're going to help us build what we call a smart curation layer on top of Civil, and that's going to drive discourse between readers and newsrooms. And we think there's a vast array of services and frankly, even the potential to apply token curated registry models to the apps and services that are being developed and sold on Civil. And that is going to be one of our more direct revenue strategies, where certainly we could envision situations where we are taking cuts from those transactions.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Like we didn't go into the technical aspects. So just can you give a brief, like say Ethereum, we have obviously the scaling problem and the transactional cost. So are you exploring solutions like state channels or sidechain solutions, like when people are doing, like say they are putting their stake, and how does that work out?
So I mentioned before that a lot of what happens on Civil is going to happen above what we call the waterline, when you have a reader that is just directly supporting a newsroom via a credit card transaction, something that's not going to touch Ethereum at all. Certainly, we give a lot of thought to scaling challenges, as any Ethereum project might. We are confident that in the short term, we're not going to run into any serious bandwidth issues in Civil's earliest days, though certainly if we grow and hit the levels of growth to which we aspire, it's going to be a good problem to have in the near future. So one of the biggest things we're thinking about is how articles are going to be stored. So if I'm a journalist, one of the biggest benefits and attractive points of publishing on this blockchain-based platform is that I can permanently archive my content in a decentralized environment. Doing so in Ethereum in the long run, we recognize is not a feasible or scalable option. So we're actively exploring a lot of options. IPFS is certainly a popular one. Like many, we're watching the Filecoin project's evolution with great interest. But we think there's going to be a lot of community-led incentive stakes that can work and help us navigate around that. But as it relates to, let's say, the CryptoKitties problem that we want to evolve, where we just break Ethereum by having too much activity, we're not concerned about that in the short term. And a lot of it is just the manner by which activity will happen and staking tokens will happen on the platform. We think it's going to be staggered and not such a high volume of transactions per second that it's going to be an existential issue in the short term.
Yeah, but isn't that a problem? That's like people who are putting content, they have to pay the gas fees every time for putting content.
So that's going to be up to the individual journalist and what they want to do. Certainly one of the features in our platform, and again, something that is very attractive for newsrooms, is this permanent archiving content. We are going to give them the option of whether or not they want to archive everything that they publish onto Ethereum or onto any decentralized environment. So if I'm publishing an 8,000 word expose on a corrupt government figure, certainly that's something that I'm probably going to want to upload for $4 or $5 or whatever gas charge would be at that time. But if this is just a 250 word blurb, it might not be as relevant. We, the civil media company, are going to maintain a central server just to ensure that there's always going to be really low latency. Mm-hmm. So there's not going to be any concern initially of a story just disappearing. And I think that's also going to help with the transactional fees, but it's going to be up to the individual newsrooms what they do and do not archive on Ethereum.
Okay. So basically, the blockchain aspect that you're using is the cryptoeconomic aspect, and how that handles, and that is the main usage of the blockchain aspect, and the aspect of like storing and all that. You are exploring that, and right now people will you would store the data on the central server, but people would have the option to push it to the blockchain.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I think we have covered quite a lot. You want to give some final words, like what are some new announcements, or what are some new features and the future roadmap of Civil?
Yes, I mean, we're in the middle of a very, very exciting month right now. I mentioned Civil Studios and Civil Labs just now. I did not mention the Civil Foundation, which is an especially relevant organization for shepherding the civil constitution and its long-term evolution. This is going to be a fully independent nonprofit organization over which we, the civil media company, retain no control or influence. And actually just last week, we appointed Vivian Schiller to lead the Civil Foundation, and she was formerly, among many other roles, the CEO and president of National Public Radio here in the US, and we think is just a great steward of ethical, responsible journalism. So she is going to be appointing the Civil Council, which will act as an appellate body where community votes can be appealed, and they will function almost like a Supreme Court model, where it's a passive model. Only if they are appealed to can they weigh in on a decision. But this is an important check that we've put into the community, where in the unlikely event that special interests, say, are able to co-opt a significant portion of the network and manipulate a vote and prove something that is, realize community consensus for something that is not in the spirit of the civil constitution, there is this appellate body that can overturn it. And then certainly satisfying cryptoeconomic norms, those decisions can be overturned by a supermajority. But this is a whole other conversation. But I think it is an important caveat to add, just as it relates to the governance of the platform and how that is going to work. Beyond that, we are getting very close to conducting our public token launch, which we're very excited about. We'll be sharing more detail on within the month of June. But today, actually, as we're talking, the first civil newsrooms have begun publishing from our first fleet, the initial newsrooms that we backed with these grants I mentioned earlier. So both Sludge and Documented, two of our newsrooms focused on investigative journalism, are live. So it's been a very, very exciting day and an even more exciting month and summer ahead for Civil. So you can come to civil.co to learn more about our platform, how we work, our upcoming token launch, and certainly hope that you will play a part.
Yeah. I think that's great. There are very few projects who have a working product and who have users, and then they are doing the token launch. That is awesome. Yeah,
no, we want to be really, really transparent in everything we do. And as I mentioned, we want this to be really the first exposure for many people to blockchain and cryptocurrency. So certainly we recognize how important it is going to be to have not only a functional product on the backside of a token launch, but to really prove that it works in a user-friendly manner where you're not going to be overwhelmed initially coming in. You can go as deep down the rabbit hole as you want, and certainly it does get more technical the deeper you go, but we want to be very inclusive and very accessible, and we think this is the way to do this. So again, come check us out, see civil.co for more, and we really look forward to a very productive summer and year ahead.
Yeah. I think, Matt, I am really interested about civil, and I learned a lot from you regarding the whole journalism space as well. And I wish you the best of luck for civil, and hopefully we'll chat again soon in 5 or 6 months when you have a lot of users on the platform.
Thank you, Arnav. Likewise.
Okay.